I saw her standing alone at the airport, mascara smudged, shoulders trembling. When she whispered, "He's gone, just stay until I forget why," I didn't know it would be the night everything changed. The first thing I noticed wasn't her face. It was the way she stood, still, like the world had kept spinning and she'd quietly decided not to follow. People rushed around her in every direction, families reuniting with loud laughter, couples pulling each other close, friends waving signs. But she just stood there at the edge of the arrivals hall, perfectly composed on the outside and unraveling in ways only silence can reveal. She wore a cream-colored coat that fell softly over her frame, elegant and understated. Her hair, dark with a few gentle strands falling loose, framed her face in a way that made her stillness feel even louder. Her suitcase rested beside her, untouched, as if it had arrived before she did. Then I saw her hand. Just one, pressing lightly against the corner of her eye. Not wiping. Just holding. As though she was trying to keep something from falling apart. I don't know why I stopped. I didn't know her name. I didn't owe her anything. But there was something about the quiet way she broke, so different from loud heartbreak, that caught me. Maybe it was the way her shoulders trembled once, just enough to betray how much she was holding in. When our eyes met, it wasn't even for a second. Just a flicker. But it was enough. Her gaze carried the kind of weight you only see when someone's been strong for too long. I didn't move closer. I just watched, quietly, while the boarding calls echoed through the terminal like a distant soundtrack to someone else's tragedy. She turned her face slightly away, not in shame, but in the kind of instinct people have when they're used to hiding their pain. A single tear slipped down, tracing a delicate line along her cheek. Her breath caught like a thread pulled too tight. I took a small step forward, careful not to startle her, the sound of my shoes soft against the polished floor. And then, without looking at me, she whispered, barely audible beneath the chaos around us. "He's gone." 2 words. That's all it took. Her voice wasn't cracking. It was hollow, like she'd run out of ways to hold it together. There was no drama in it. No begging. Just finality. She didn't ask me for help. She didn't even look at me again. But something in the way she said it, it wasn't a statement meant for the air. It was meant to land somewhere, even if she didn't know where. I found myself standing beside her, not too close, just enough so she wasn't alone in that quiet space she'd carved out of the crowd. People brushed past us like we were invisible. The scent of her perfume, light, warm, like jasmine and rain, floated through the air, settling somewhere just beneath the noise. And for a moment, it felt like time slowed down around her grief. I didn't know her story. But I knew I couldn't walk away. I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I knew anything I said in that moment would sound too loud for the quiet she was standing in. So instead, I found an empty row of seats a few steps away and sat, not across from her, not behind her, but beside her. Just close enough to let her know she wasn't invisible. The terminal was still alive with its endless rhythm, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, children pulling on tired parents' sleeves. But between us, there was only a kind of suspended silence, delicate and strangely calm. She didn't look at me at first. Her gaze stayed locked on the sliding glass doors, as if she expected him to walk back through them at any second. Her shoulders were stiff, drawn inward like someone bracing against a storm they can't stop. Minutes passed. I didn't count them, but I felt every second like a slow drip of water into a still lake. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile, but not weak. More like someone who had been holding a scream at the back of her throat for hours and decided against letting it out. Just, her fingers curled into the armrest, knuckles pressing pale against the metal. Just stay. Until I forget why I'm crying. I didn't answer with words. I didn't need to. I simply nodded, letting the silence carry my promise. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that seems to scrape its way out of your chest. A strand of her hair fell forward, brushing against her cheek. For a moment, she closed her eyes, and I saw it, how exhaustion isn't always about sleepless nights. Sometimes, it's about holding too much for too long. The distance between our hands was small, barely the width of 2 fingers. I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin even without touching. It was strange how something so small could feel louder than the entire terminal. A group of travelers laughed nearby, the sound bright and careless. She flinched, not in resentment, but like the sound had cut through a place she wasn't ready to leave. I shifted slightly, not to shield her, but to make space. To let her grief breathe without interruption. Her breathing began to change after a while. It wasn't steady, but it was softer. Not sharp, not trembling, just tired. She rested the back of her head against the seat and tilted her face upward, blinking slowly, like she was trying to find something on the ceiling that would make everything make sense. A small, broken laugh slipped from her lips, not the kind that carries joy, but the kind that escapes when pain is too heavy to keep inside. "I shouldn't be doing this," she murmured. "Crying in front of someone I don't even know." I turned my head toward her, but she didn't look back. So I said the only thing that felt right. "Then don't think of me as someone you don't know. Think of me as someone who's just here." The corner of her mouth lifted, not a smile, not fully, but enough to soften the sharp edges around her eyes. The airport's cold breeze drifted in through the automatic doors, brushing against my arm, carrying her scent, light, floral, steady. She shifted slightly, her shoulder almost brushing mine now. Not a touch, just closeness. Quiet, real, unspoken. And in that moment, between boarding calls and departing lives, I wasn't a stranger anymore. I was simply the one who stayed. We ended up in a quiet corner of the airport cafe. It wasn't planned. She just started walking, suitcase wheels humming softly over the floor, and I followed without saying a word. The cafe was half empty, lit by the kind of warm yellow light that makes everything feel slower. Outside, planes came and went like silent ghosts against the night. She chose a table by the window. Not because of the view, I could tell she wasn't really seeing anything out there, but because it was the farthest from everyone else. She sat first, carefully, like someone who didn't want the chair to make a sound. I took the seat across from her. Steam curled from the mug in her hands, untouched. She wrapped her fingers around it, not for warmth, but as if holding something solid made her feel less adrift. For a while, we didn't talk. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet in a way that didn't need to be filled. She traced a small line on the mug's handle with her thumb. Her eyes were swollen but steady now, like someone standing after being knocked down. "He didn't even look back," she finally said. The words fell softly, but they landed heavy. She didn't say who he was. She didn't have to. The way her voice trembled on that one sentence carried a whole history I didn't know but could almost feel. I didn't rush to ask questions. Instead, I let the silence stretch out just enough so she knew it was safe to keep going or stop if she wanted to. I waited, she continued, eyes fixed on some invisible spot on the table. Right there. I waited for him to turn around. Just once. But he didn't. He just kept walking like I was, air. The corner of her lip twitched, not in a smile, but in that raw, fractured way people make when they're fighting their own tears. She let out a breath that shook at the end. I leaned forward just slightly, resting my forearms on the table, not to invade her space, just to close the distance a little. The low hum of the terminal played around us, the distant sound of rolling suitcases, the faint metallic ding of the gate announcements, soft chatter blending into a blur. But between us, it felt like the world had paused. She finally lifted her gaze, and for the first time, her eyes met mine fully. No flickering away. No wall. Just an open wound, steady and quiet. "Why are you still here?" she asked softly. It wasn't suspicious. It was tired. It was the kind of question people ask when they've stopped expecting anyone to stay. I thought about lying. Saying something easy, something light. But instead, I gave her the truth. Because you asked me to. Something shifted in her expression then, not a smile, not relief, but a softness. Like someone had just been reminded they weren't a burden. Her fingers loosened their grip on the mug. A faint tremor in her hand gave her away. And before I could second guess it, I reached out, not to grab, just to let my hand rest near hers on the table. Not touching, but close enough for the warmth between us to hum like a quiet pulse. Her eyes flicked down to that space. She didn't move away. She didn't lean in either. She just stayed. And sometimes, staying is louder than any promise. What was supposed to be a moment stretched into hours. The night bled into the quiet part of the airport, the part where departures slowed, announcements thinned out, and the world seemed to breathe a little softer. We didn't plan to stay. But neither of us stood up. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded loosely across her chest, and for the first time since I'd seen her, the tightness in her posture had eased just a little. The kind of ease that comes when you've stopped running from the noise in your own head. After a while, she said, I should go home. But she didn't move. She just stared at the glass wall of the terminal as if home was a place she couldn't return to yet. I didn't answer. Some words don't need replies, they just need to exist. Eventually, she stood, grabbing the handle of her suitcase. She didn't look at me, but her steps were slow, almost careful, like she was hoping I'd follow without asking. So I did. The terminal was nearly empty now. The polished floors reflected the dim lights overhead. In the distance, a plane lifted into the dark sky, its engines rumbling like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. She stopped near one of the wide windows facing the runway, the kind people usually rush past. She just stared out, arms folded, head tilted slightly to the side. It's strange, she said softly. Everything out there is moving. Planes taking off. People leaving. And I feel like I'm the only one who's stuck. I stepped up beside her, just enough that our shoulders were close enough to feel the warmth through layers of fabric. She didn't look at me, but she didn't pull away either. Sometimes, I said, standing still is its own kind of movement. She let out a soft laugh, a real one this time. It wasn't loud or perfect. It cracked a little halfway through. But it was real. And for a brief second, I saw the woman beneath the pain, strong, graceful, quietly stubborn. We walked through the empty hallways after that. Past closed cafes and silent gates. Past faces on posters smiling like nothing ever hurt. Every so often, her hand would brush against mine, not intentional, just the quiet, accidental way two people's paths start to align. She pointed out a child sleeping on a bench, curled into their mother's side. A couple holding hands as they waited for their red-eye flight. A man asleep with a newspaper over his face. Everyone's going somewhere, she whispered. So are you, I said softly. She turned her head toward me then. Not fully. Just enough for her eyes to catch the low, warm light. There was something different in her gaze, something quieter, softer. As if for the first time tonight, she wasn't just looking at the world through pain. She was looking at me. For a heartbeat, everything felt still. No planes. No voices. Just us and the soft hum of fluorescent lights above. Her hand brushed mine again. This time, it lingered. Just barely. A warm, fragile thread of connection. Neither of us spoke. Hours had passed, but it didn't feel like waiting anymore. It felt like arriving. We found an empty bench tucked away near one of the quiet departure gates. The kind of place where time seemed to forget to move. Outside the wide glass windows, the runway lights shimmered against the darkness, their reflections dancing across the floor like distant stars. She sat first, setting her small suitcase beside her feet. She didn't fold in on herself this time. She just exhaled, slow and shaky, as if the night had finally caught up with her. I took the seat next to her, close enough to feel the faint brush of her coat against my arm. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Her hands were clasped loosely, fingers tangled as though they were holding on to each other for strength. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It had changed. It had weight. Warmth. Another plane began to roll down the runway, its engines letting out a soft, steady roar. She flinched at the sound, not visibly, just a small tightening of her shoulders. But I noticed. She tilted her head to the side, whispering more to herself than to me. He left on a flight that sounded just like that. The confession floated into the air and lingered, quiet but sharp. I didn't speak. I didn't try to pull her away from that memory. I just let her feel it. Then, without looking at me, she leaned back slowly, until her shoulder brushed against mine. It was a small movement, soft as a sigh, but it landed like a quiet storm. Her head rested against my shoulder a heartbeat later. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. Her weight wasn't heavy. It was hesitant at first, then steady, as though she'd let herself stop pretending to be fine. I stayed still. Not stiff, not startled. Just present. I could feel the warmth of her through the layers of fabric. The scent of her perfume, soft, floral, familiar now, curled around me, wrapping the space between us in something unspoken. Her hair brushed lightly against my jaw, feather-soft. Her breathing shifted, too. It slowed, aligning with mine in quiet sync. For the first time that night, she didn't hold herself upright. She didn't try to hide the tremor in her breath. She just was. Minutes stretched out like a fragile thread neither of us wanted to break. The world around us existed, but it was distant. Faded. My hand moved almost on its own, not fast, not sudden. Just a slow, deliberate movement until it rested lightly on top of hers. Her fingers stiffened at the touch at first, a tiny pause, then slowly, they softened beneath my palm. And then, she curled them around mine. Her hand was warm. Not the kind of warmth that burns, but the kind that anchors you. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She let out a quiet breath, the kind people make when they stop holding their world together alone. I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing through the quiet press of her shoulder against mine. Her head tilted just slightly closer. My thumb brushed across her knuckles, not out of boldness, but out of something gentler. Something real. And right there, under the low hum of the terminal, with planes disappearing into the night sky, something shifted between us. No promises. No words. Just a quiet touch that said, "I'm here." And for the first time, it felt like she believed it. By the time the first light of morning began to push against the airport glass, the world around us had changed. The once silent terminal was slowly waking up, soft footsteps on polished floors, tired voices ordering coffee, the distant beeping of early baggage carts. But in the corner where we sat, everything still felt suspended. Her head was still resting against my shoulder, and my hand was still wrapped around hers. Neither of us had moved in a long time. We didn't need to. There was a quiet kind of safety in the stillness, like we'd built a small, invisible shelter between the noise of what was and the uncertainty of what came next. The sky outside was streaked with soft gold and pale pink, dawn stretching its fingers across the runway. She shifted slowly, lifting her head from my shoulder, not abruptly, but like someone gently waking from a long, restless dream. Her hair brushed lightly against my jaw as she moved, leaving a soft warmth behind. Her eyes were tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep but from carrying too much for too long. But something was different now. They weren't hollow. They were alive. She looked at me, not as a stranger, not even as someone who just happened to be there. She looked at me like I'd seen her at her most fragile, and hadn't turned away. I didn't think I'd feel safe with anyone again, she whispered. The words weren't rehearsed. They slipped out like they'd been waiting at the edge of her throat all night, unsure if they'd ever be spoken aloud. I didn't answer right away. I just let the sound of it settle in the quiet between us. Her fingers were still resting loosely in mine, and when I gave them the smallest squeeze, she didn't pull away. Sometimes, I said softly, safety doesn't come from knowing someone. It comes from being seen, without having to explain everything. Her lips parted slightly, not to speak, but like the words had touched something raw and unexpected. The morning light spilled across her face, softening the lines that heartbreak had carved during the night. She turned fully toward me then, slow and deliberate. Our knees brushed lightly. The movement wasn't romantic in the obvious way, it was quiet, real, deeply human. Her fingers shifted against mine, trailing lightly along the back of my hand, like she was tracing something she didn't have the courage to name yet. Her touch wasn't searching. It was thanking. I was supposed to be okay, she whispered, her voice catching on the last word. I was supposed to move on. I told everyone I was fine. But when he left, something just stopped. Her breath trembled. But her eyes didn't run anymore. I leaned forward slightly, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath brush against my cheek. I didn't speak. Sometimes, silence is the only language two people need. The light behind her grew brighter, outlining her face in a soft, golden halo. Her gaze flicked down to where our hands were still entwined. Then back up. I don't know why I asked you to stay, she said, barely audible. But I'm glad you did. And in that moment, with the morning sun spilling across the glass and the world around us waking up, the night between us felt like something more than just coincidence. Not a promise. Not a future. Just something real, quietly unfolding. The terminal had fully awakened by the time we finally stood up. Early commuters, tired travelers, and airline staff moved around us in a blur, but we felt untouchable, like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. She picked up her small suitcase and adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, her movements deliberate, yet softer than I had ever seen them. She didn't glance at me as she started walking toward the exit. I followed, close enough that the space between us felt measured, careful, and comfortable. Neither of us spoke. The quiet that had defined the night now carried a weight of understanding, a language we didn't need words for. Outside, the cool morning air hit us. It smelled faintly of jet fuel, rain-soaked pavement, and something clean, like a world just waking up. She paused at the edge of the terminal doors, as if hesitant to leave the cocoon we had shared. I reached for her hand then, not with urgency, not with a demand, but with the soft certainty of someone who wanted to walk beside her, fully and entirely. Her fingers slipped into mine naturally, almost instinctively. Not a handshake. Not a tentative brush. It was like her hand had been waiting for mine to find it, and when it did, everything felt right. Her grip was gentle, yet firm, a quiet declaration that she trusted me in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. We walked slowly, side by side, letting the city morning embrace us. She occasionally glanced at me, her eyes warm but guarded, like she was testing to see if reality could hold this softness without shattering. I smiled faintly each time, just enough to let her know, I wasn't going anywhere. The streets were nearly empty, painted with the soft gold of sunrise. A light breeze drifted past, tugging gently at the ends of her hair. She reached up, brushing a stray strand behind her ear, and I caught the subtle way her fingers lingered against her cheek, like she was savoring the closeness, hesitant to let it end. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice carrying a softness I had never heard before. Not for the night. Not for me. For the fact that she could finally feel safe again, even if just for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," I said, letting a quiet smile touch my lips. "We're just here. That's enough." Her lips curved into the smallest smile, shy, unpolished, real. And then she leaned slightly closer, not in need, not in desperation, but because she wanted to. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel like she had to protect herself from the world. The warmth of her body, the soft pressure of her hand in mine, the rhythm of her steps alongside mine, it all settled in me like something I had been waiting for without realizing it. We reached the street, the morning sun spilling across the pavement, catching the soft glint of her hair. I noticed the slight shiver of the cool air against her coat, and without thinking, I drew her a fraction closer, just enough that our shoulders brushed and her head tilted ever so slightly toward mine. She didn't pull away. She didn't need to. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, something extraordinary had settled between us. Not a promise. Not a declaration. Just the simple, profound understanding that sometimes, staying is all it takes. We walked on together, not knowing what would come next, but certain that we would face it side by side. And that was enough. If this quiet, heartfelt journey touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more slow burn romances. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever stayed for someone in a moment like this? And check the link in the description for the full, extended story.